I was standing on my dock watching the sunrise over Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, with my morning coffee when I saw the neon orange notice stapled to my piling. My gut dropped before I even read the words. The paper fluttered in the October breeze, and I could already feel the headache coming on. Notice of condemnation screamed across the top in bold red letters. My name, Oliver Thompson, was misspelled as Olivier, which somehow made the whole thing more infuriating. According to this official-looking document from the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association, my private dock was in violation of multiple codes and presented a hazard to the community. I had 30 days to remove it entirely or face daily fines of $500. I crushed my coffee cup slightly, the hot liquid nearly spilling over my fingers. This dock had been here since 1947. My grandfather built it with his own hands, and I had the original construction permits framed in my study. The wood was solid cypress, maintained religiously every spring, and the structure was more sound than half the houses in this overpriced neighborhood. The list of violations was absurd. Excessive length extending beyond community standards. My dock was 40 feet, the same length it had been for 78 years. Non-compliant materials not matching HOA aesthetic guidelines. Again, original cypress that had weathered to a beautiful silver gray that every marine architect who saw it called a work of art. Unauthorized modifications without HOA approval. I had replaced exactly 3 boards last April after a particularly harsh winter, using the exact same specifications as the originals. I yanked the notice down and stormed up the lawn toward my house. The property had been in my family since before Lakeshore Estates existed. My grandfather bought 5 acres of pristine lakefront in 1945, built a modest cabin that my father eventually expanded into a proper home, and I inherited it 3 years ago when Dad passed. The neighborhood sprouted up around us in the 90s when a developer bought the adjacent farmland and created this gated community of McMansions with their own private marina. Inside, I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer, Marcus Wellington, who I kept on retainer specifically because of HOA nonsense like this. This was not my first rodeo with the Lakeshore Estates Board. "Oliver, it is 7 in the morning," Marcus answered groggily. "They are trying to make me destroy my grandfather's dock," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Condemnation notice. 30 days. I heard rustling, then the sound of a coffee maker starting. "Email me the notice. I will look at it and call you back in an hour." I scanned the document and sent it over, then sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out the lockbox where I kept all the property documents. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from pure rage. The deed, the surveys, the permits, the historical documentation, the title insurance papers, everything was in perfect order, as it had been the last 4 times the HOA tried to pull something. The Lakeshore Estates Board was run by a woman named Patricia Kleinfeld, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated the HOA presidency like it was the United Nations Security Council. She had moved into the neighborhood 6 years ago, joined the board within 6 months, and made president within a year through a combination of relentless campaigning and wearing down anyone who opposed her. Her particular obsession was uniformity and property values, which translated to making everyone's homes look identical and harassing anyone who deviated from her vision by even a shade of paint. I was her white whale. My property predated the HOA, which meant I was not actually bound by most of their rules. My grandfather had the foresight to refuse to sign any agreements when the development went up, and the developer could not touch our land because we owned the only deep water access point on this section of the lake. They had to build their marina 200 yards south where the bottom was rockier and the water shallower. Patricia hated this. She hated that my house was painted forest green instead of the approved beige or gray. She hated that I had a vegetable garden in my front yard instead of the mandated ornamental landscaping. She hated that I parked my fishing boat in my driveway sometimes instead of keeping it hidden in a garage. Most of all, she hated that my beautiful historic dock was visible from the community marina and made their newer, characterless floating docks look cheap by comparison. Marcus called me back 45 minutes later. This is aggressive, even for Patricia. The violations are completely fabricated. Your dock is grandfathered under Wisconsin state law, and they have zero jurisdiction over structures that predate the HOA. So I just ignore this. No, because they will start fining you anyway, and then you will have to fight them in court to get the fines thrown out, which wastes everyone's time and money. I will draft a response citing the relevant statutes and send it to their lawyer. This should go away quietly. But I had a sinking feeling it would not go away quietly. Patricia did not do anything quietly. That evening, I was replacing a light fixture on the dock when I heard the aggressive purr of a golf cart coming down the path. Only HOA board members drove golf carts in Lakeshore Estates, a strange affectation that made them feel more official. Patricia emerged wearing a white pantsuit that must have cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and oversized sunglasses, despite the sun being close to setting. "Mr. Thompson," she called out in that sing-song voice that made my teeth ache. "I see you received our notice." I did not look up from my work, tightening the mounting screws. "I did. My lawyer is handling it." "This does not need to involve lawyers," she said, walking onto my dock without invitation. Her heels clicked against the wood planks. "This is a simple matter of community compliance. Patricia, I have told you this multiple times. My property predates your HOA. I am not part of your community association. I have no obligation to comply with your rules." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Actually, that is where you are wrong. We have had our legal team review the covenants extensively. While your home itself may be grandfathered, any structures extending into the lake are subject to municipal waterway regulations, which our HOA is authorized to enforce on behalf of the township." I finally turned to face her. "That is completely false. Show me the statute." "It is all in the notice," she said airily. "The point is, Oliver, this dock is an eyesore. It does not match the aesthetic of our community. It makes the whole neighborhood look run down. Potential buyers see it from the marina and think the area is poorly maintained. My dock is better maintained than any structure in your entire development." Her smile turned icy. "Be that as it may, we have codes for a reason. Everyone else follows them. You are not special just because your property is older. I am not part of your HOA, Patricia. I never signed your covenants. You have no authority here." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable behind those ridiculous sunglasses. "We will see about that. The fines start in 30 days. She walked back to her golf cart and drove off, leaving me standing there with my blood pressure through the roof. Over the next week, Marcus sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Voss who worked for a firm in Milwaukee that specialized in real estate law. Voss sent back a surprisingly detailed response that basically argued the HOA had authority over all lake structures within the boundaries of Lakeshore Estates, based on a Wisconsin statute about water access and a township ordinance about dock permits. Marcus called me, sounding puzzled. "They are really reaching here, but they put some effort into this argument. It is still garbage legally, but this is more sophisticated than their usual attempts to bully you. So what do? I will file for a declaratory judgment. We get a judge to formally rule that the HOA has no jurisdiction over your dock. It will cost you maybe $3,000 in legal fees, but it will shut this down permanently. Do it. But while Marcus was preparing the filing, things escalated. I came home from work one afternoon. I was a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant in Burlington to find two men in City of Lake Geneva uniforms examining my dock. I parked and walked down quickly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older one, a guy with a gray beard and a clipboard, looked up. "You Oliver Thompson. We are doing a safety inspection on this dock structure." "On whose authority?" "City received a complaint about structural integrity. We are required to investigate." I felt my jaw clench. "I have all the permits and inspection records inside. This dock is completely sound." They spent 20 minutes poking around, testing boards, examining the pilings. Finally, the older inspector nodded. "Structure looks solid to me. I will file a report saying no issues found. You should not have any more problems." "Who filed the complaint?" He consulted his clipboard. "Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association. A Patricia Kleinfeld." Of course it was. The next incident came 3 days later. I woke up on a Saturday morning and walked down to the dock to take my boat out for some fishing. Someone had driven metal stakes into the lake bottom about 30 feet from the end of my dock with yellow caution tape strung between them, creating a barrier. A laminated sign hung from the tape. "Hazard area, unsafe structure, do not approach." I called the police non-emergency line. An officer arrived within an hour, a young guy named Deputy Torres who looked barely old enough to shave. "Those are not official city markers," he said after examining them. "Someone put those up without authorization. That is technically vandalism on your property. You want to file a report." "Yes," I said, "and I know exactly who did it." Torres took my statement, photographed the stakes and signs, and helped me pull them all out. "You have some kind of dispute with the HOA. You could say that." He shook his head. "I see this stuff all the time in these neighborhoods. People get a little power and lose their minds. My advice: get a security camera down here. If they come back, you will have evidence." I took his advice and installed 2 high-definition cameras that afternoon, one covering the dock and one covering the path leading down from my house. I also put up a very visible private property video surveillance sign. The cameras paid off 3 days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and watched in real time as Patricia and 2 board members, a guy named Gerald Morrison and a woman named Susan Chen, walked onto my dock carrying a clipboard and camera. They spent 15 minutes photographing every inch of the structure, with Patricia pointing at various spots and the others taking notes. I saved the video and sent it to Marcus with a message: "Trespassing. Add it to the file." Marcus responded, "Beautiful. This shows a pattern of harassment. Judge will not like this." The court date for the declaratory judgment was set for November 15th, which was 5 weeks away. In the meantime, the HOA seemed to back off slightly, probably because their lawyer told them to stop doing anything that could be documented as harassment before the hearing. I used the relative piece to do some research. I pulled out all my grandfather's old papers, looking through boxes of documents I had not touched in years. My grandfather, Otto Thompson, had been meticulous about record keeping. I found his original survey maps, his correspondence with the county about permits, even his personal journals documenting the dock construction. But I found something else too. Something I had seen before but never really thought about carefully. It was a deed from 1945, the original purchase document when my grandfather bought the property. The description was specific. 5 acres of land including waterfront and lake bottom rights extending 200 feet from the shoreline. I sat back in my chair, reading it again. Lake bottom rights. That was unusual. Most waterfront properties owned to the shoreline, but the lake bottom itself was typically held by the state or municipality. But this deed specifically granted my grandfather ownership of the lake bottom extending out 200 feet. I pulled out a survey map of the area and did some quick measurements. The Lakeshore Estates Marina was built approximately 180 feet from what used to be the shoreline before the development went up. If my property line extended 200 feet out into the lake. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus, my hands actually shaking. "I need you to look at something. How quickly can you get to my house? I am in Madison meeting a client. I can be there by 8 tonight. What is this about? I think I own the land under the HOA's marina." There was a long pause. "What? Just get here. Bring someone who specializes in property surveys and water rights." Marcus arrived at 8:30 with a woman named Jennifer Kowalski who worked for a firm that did complex property line disputes. I spread all the documents out on my dining room table and showed them the deed and the survey maps. Jennifer studied everything carefully, pulling out a modern satellite image of the area and overlaying it with the historical survey. She used a ruler and did some calculations, then looked up with an expression somewhere between shock and delight. "If this deed is legitimate and was properly recorded, you own the lake bottom extending 200 feet from your original shoreline," she said slowly. "The marina is built at approximately 170 feet. The parking area for the boat slips is at 150 feet. The entire northern section of their facility is on your property." Marcus let out a long breath. "We need to verify this with the county records office. If there is any ambiguity or if subsequent surveys modified this boundary, it will not hold up." "I am free tomorrow," Jennifer said. "We can go to the county clerk first thing in the morning and pull every document filed on this property since 1945. I barely slept that night. The implications were enormous. If I actually owned the land under their marina, I had leverage beyond anything I could have imagined. This was not just about protecting my dock anymore. The next morning, Jennifer and I drove to the Walworth County Clerk's office in Elkhorn. We spent 4 hours going through records, pulling every survey, deed transfer, and plat map filed for this section of Lake Geneva. Jennifer photographed everything and made copies of the crucial documents. We grabbed lunch at a diner while she reviewed everything on her laptop. Finally, she looked up at me. "It is airtight. Your grandfather's deed grants lake bottom rights that were never subdivided or transferred. Every subsequent survey of your property maintained those boundaries." When the developer created Lakeshore Estates in 1994, they apparently never did a comprehensive survey of the lake bottom because they assumed it was public waterway. They built the marina on what they thought was publicly owned lake bottom that they leased from the city. But the city never owned this section. Your family did. So I own it. You own it. The marina, or at least the northern third of it, is built on your private property without your permission. That is trespassing on a massive scale. I sat back in the booth, my mind racing. What are my options? Legally, you could demand they remove the entire structure. You could charge them retroactive rent for the past 30 years. You could sue for damages. Or, she paused, you could use this as leverage to make them leave you alone permanently. I thought about Patricia and her condemnation notice, her constant harassment, her smugness when she threatened me with fines. A slow smile spread across my face. Let us schedule a meeting with the HOA board. I want to present this information to them personally. Marcus was thrilled when we told him. He drafted a formal notice to the HOA documenting my ownership of the lake bottom and demanding an immediate meeting to discuss unauthorized use of private property. He sent it via certified mail and email to ensure they could not claim they never received it. Patricia called me personally 2 hours after the email was sent. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "This is ridiculous. You do not own the lake. That is public water." "The water is public, Patricia. The land underneath it is mine. Check the deed." "Better yet, have your expensive lawyer check it. We will see about that. This is just another one of your attempts to avoid following community standards." The meeting is scheduled for Friday at 7 p.m. in the community center. I expect the entire board to be there. Bring your lawyer too. You are going to want legal advice for this conversation. She hung up without responding. Friday evening, I arrived at the Lakeshore Estates Community Center with Marcus and Jennifer. We had prepared a full presentation with maps, surveys, deed copies, and a legal analysis of the situation. I was carrying a briefcase full of documents and a laptop with a PowerPoint presentation that Jennifer had put together. The community center was one of those aggressively neutral spaces with beige walls and cheap conference tables. The HOA board was already there, seated on one side of the main table like this was a trial. Patricia sat in the middle, flanked by Gerald Morrison and Susan Chen. 2 other board members I barely knew, David Kim and Margaret Walsh, sat at the ends. Their lawyer, Richard Voss, sat next to Patricia looking annoyed at having his Friday evening interrupted. We sat down across from them. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of bound documents. "Thank you for meeting with us on short notice. We have information that significantly changes the nature of our previous disputes." Patricia folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Wellington, my client's position is simple. Mr. Thompson's dock is in violation of multiple community standards and local ordinances. His attempts to cloud the issue with irrelevant historical documents do not change that fact. Actually, Ms. Kleinfeld, these historical documents are entirely relevant. In fact, they demonstrate that your HOA has been operating under a significant misunderstanding about property boundaries." Marcus nodded to Jennifer. Jennifer opened her laptop and pulled up the presentation on a portable projector she had brought. The first slide showed the original 1945 survey of my grandfather's property. This is the deed survey from when Otto Thompson purchased 5 acres of lakefront property. Note the specific language here. She used a laser pointer to highlight the relevant section. The deed grants ownership not just of the land, but of the lake bottom extending 200 feet from the shoreline. Richard Voss leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Let me see the original deed." Marcus slid a certified copy across the table. Voss read it carefully, his expression darkening. "Go on." Jennifer clicked to the next slide, showing a modern satellite image overlaid with the property boundaries. This yellow line represents the 200-foot extension of Mr. Thompson's lake bottom property rights. This red outline shows the current location of the Lakeshore Estates Marina facility. The overlap was obvious and damning. About a third of the marina fell within the yellow boundary. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Patricia's face had gone very pale. "That cannot be right. The marina is on public waterway. The city granted us the permits." "The city granted you permits based on the assumption that they owned the lake bottom," Jennifer said calmly. "They were wrong. The lake bottom in this location was privately deeded in 1945 and has never been transferred to public ownership. We verified this with the Walworth County Clerk's office. Every survey and title search confirms that Mr. Thompson owns the lake bottom extending 200 feet from his shoreline." Gerald Morrison spoke up, his voice uncertain. But we have been operating this marina for almost 25 years. Surely there is some kind of— What is it called? Adverse possession. Marcus shook his head. Adverse possession requires, among other things, that the possession be open, notorious, and hostile. You built the marina believing you had legal permission to use public land. That fails the hostile requirement. Additionally, the statutory period for adverse possession of lakefront property in Wisconsin is 20 years, but that clock only starts when the true owner has reason to know about the trespass and does nothing. Mr. Thompson only recently discovered the full extent of his property rights while researching historical documents to defend against your condemnation notice. Richard Voss was furiously taking notes. I need to see all of your documentation. Every survey, every title report, every deed transfer. Jennifer pulled out a thick binder. We anticipated that. Here are certified copies of everything. We can also provide contact information for the county clerk and the surveyor who verified the boundary lines. Patricia found her voice again, but it was strained. What do you want? I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. I want you to withdraw the condemnation notice on my dock immediately. I want a written agreement that the HOA will never again attempt to enforce any rules, regulations, or aesthetic guidelines on my property, including my dock, my house, my landscaping, or any other structure or feature. I want this agreement filed with the county to bind all future HOA boards. And I want a formal apology from this board for the harassment and trespassing. That is absurd, Patricia snapped. You cannot just— The alternative, I continued calmly, is that I exercise my full property rights. I can demand removal of the entire northern section of your marina at your expense. I can charge you retroactive rent for the 30 years you have been trespassing on my property. Jennifer has estimated that amount at approximately $1.2 million. I can sue for damages and legal fees. Or I can simply grant you a lease to continue using my property for a monthly fee. Let us say $5,000 per month, $60,000 a year, which seems reasonable for marina space. Margaret Walsh, who had been silent until now, said quietly, That would bankrupt the association. Probably, I agreed. Special assessments on all the homeowners, increased dues, depletion of reserves. It would be financially devastating. Or you could sign a simple agreement leaving me and my property alone. Richard Voss held up a hand. I need to consult with my clients privately. Can you give us the room for 15 minutes? We stepped outside into the cool November evening. Marcus was grinning. That went perfectly. They are terrified. Think they will sign? I asked. If Voss is any kind of decent lawyer, he will tell them to sign immediately. They have no legal ground to stand on, and fighting this would cost them hundreds of thousands in legal fees alone, not to mention the risk of losing and owing you rent and damages. Jennifer nodded. The only question is whether Patricia's ego will let her accept this. She is used to being in control. We waited 20 minutes before Voss opened the door and gestured us back inside. The board members looked shell-shocked. Patricia's face was rigid, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. Voss spoke in a carefully controlled voice. My clients are prepared to accept your terms with some modifications. They will withdraw the condemnation notice. They will provide written documentation that your property is not subject to HOA covenants. However, they request that this agreement remain confidential and not be publicly disclosed to other homeowners. Marcus looked at me. I shook my head. No, the agreement gets filed with the county as part of the public record. Other homeowners have a right to know that my property is not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Patricia made a strangled sound. Several other homeowners in Lakeshore Estates had been making noise recently about excessive HOA fees and overreach. If they found out that my property was completely exempt, it might encourage them to push back harder. Voss grimaced. That is a deal breaker for my clients, I shrugged. Then I will proceed with demanding removal of the Marina. Jennifer, can you draft a formal notice of trespass? Wait, Margaret Walsh said urgently. She looked at Patricia. This is not worth it. We sign his agreement, we drop the dock issue, and we move on. Trying to keep this confidential will only make it worse when it inevitably comes out. Susan Chen nodded reluctantly. Margaret is right. We are not in a position to negotiate. Patricia stared at me with pure hatred. Fine, we will sign your agreement, but you should know that this is not over. We will find other ways to address the problems your property creates for this community. Marcus spoke up sharply. Miss Kleinfeld, that statement could be interpreted as a threat of continued harassment. I would advise you to be very careful about any future actions your board takes regarding Mr. Thompson or his property. We will be documenting everything, and we will not hesitate to pursue legal remedies for any violations of the agreement we are about to sign. Richard Voss put a hand on Patricia's arm. Patricia, stop talking. Everyone, let me draft the agreement language and we can execute this tonight. It took another 2 hours of negotiating specific language, but eventually we had an agreement. It stated clearly that my property predated the HOA and was not subject to any HOA covenants, rules, or regulations. The HOA acknowledged that they had no authority over my dock, home, landscaping, or any other aspect of my property. They withdrew the condemnation notice and agreed not to pursue any future enforcement actions against me. The agreement would be filed with the Walworth County Clerk and would bind all future HOA boards. In exchange, I agreed not to charge the HOA rent for their use of my Lake Bottom property, and I would not demand removal or modification of the Marina as long as they complied with the agreement. We all signed. I took my copy and walked out of that community center feeling like I had just won the lottery. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder in the parking lot. Congratulations! You are officially free of the most aggressive HOA in Wisconsin. Couldn't have done it without you too, I said, shaking hands with both him and Jennifer. Send me your invoices. This was worth every penny. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The stress of constantly battling Patricia and her board had been wearing me down more than I realized. Now it was over, or so I thought. For about 2 weeks, everything was quiet. The agreement was filed with the county. I did not hear from Patricia or any board member. Life returned to normal. I worked on winterizing my dock, preparing for the coming cold weather. I took my boat out for a few last fishing trips before storing it for the season. Then things started getting weird. I came home from work one afternoon to find a citation from the city of Lake Geneva stuck to my front door. It claimed that my dock required a new permit because of recent modifications, and that I had 30 days to apply or face penalties. I called the city offices immediately. The clerk who answered sounded confused. I do not show any inspection or citation issued for your address. Can you read me the citation number? I read it. She put me on hold, then came back sounding annoyed. Sir, that is not one of our citation forms. Someone made a fake document. You should file a police report. I called Deputy Torres again. He came out, looked at the fake citation, and shook his head. This is the third fake city document case I have seen in Lakeshore Estates this month. Someone is playing games. I will file a report, but unless you have evidence of who is doing it, there is not much we can investigate. I checked my security cameras, but whoever posted the citation had approached from the street side of my house, outside the camera range. A few days later, I found a rock through my mailbox. The mailbox post was snapped, and the box itself was dented and unusable. The cameras caught it happening at 2 in the morning. A figure in dark clothing and a ski mask approached, swung something, and left. The angle and lighting made identification impossible. Deputy Torres came out again. "You are being harassed. Same person who put up the fake citation, probably. You thought about upgrading your security system. More cameras, better lighting." I installed 2 more cameras and motion-activated floodlights. The harassment stopped for a while, but the tension was always there. I would see Patricia driving past my house in her golf cart, slowing down to stare. Gerald Morrison started parking his car on the street, directly in front of my driveway, even though he lived 3 streets over, forcing me to ask him to move every time I wanted to get my car out. Marcus sent a strongly worded letter reminding the HOA board about the harassment provisions in our agreement. The parking stopped, but the Cold War continued. In early December, I discovered the real problem. I was at the Marina restaurant having dinner with a friend when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 women I recognized as Lakeshore Estates residents were talking, and I heard my name. "Thompson is trying to take over the marina. My neighbor said he owns the land underneath it and wants to charge the HOA rent." "That is terrible. Why would someone do that? The marina is for everyone." Patricia said he has always been hostile to the community. He refuses to follow any of the rules, and now he is trying to extort money from the association. I felt my blood pressure spike. I turned to the women. "Excuse me," I could not help but overhear. "I am Oliver Thompson. Where did you hear that information?" They both looked embarrassed. One of them, a blonde woman in her 60s, said hesitantly, "It was in the HOA newsletter. Patricia's monthly message." "You have a copy of that newsletter?" She pulled out her phone and showed me. Patricia's monthly president's message took up the entire front page. It was titled, "Protecting Our Community from External Threats," and it was a masterpiece of manipulation. She never mentioned me by name, but she described a situation where a hostile neighbor was exploiting legal technicalities to threaten the existence of our community marina. She talked about the need for unity and vigilance against people who prioritize personal gain over community welfare. She had completely twisted the narrative. To the homeowners who did not know the full story, it sounded like I was the aggressor trying to shut down their marina for profit. I took screenshots and sent them to Marcus immediately. He called me 10 minutes later. "This is a clear violation of your agreement. She is engaging in a defamation campaign against you. What can we do?" "Demand a retraction and an apology in the next newsletter. If she refuses, we sue for breach of contract and defamation. Her statements are demonstrably false and are damaging your reputation in the community." Marcus sent a formal demand letter the next morning. Richard Voss responded within hours, surprisingly contrite. He stated that Patricia had written the newsletter without running it past him or the rest of the board, and that he agreed it violated the spirit if not the letter of the agreement. He promised a retraction in the next newsletter, but the damage was done. I started getting hostile looks when I went to the grocery store. Someone left a note on my car windshield calling me a greedy parasite. A couple of my neighbors, who I had always been friendly with, stopped returning my waves. Patricia's retraction in the next newsletter was half-hearted and buried in the back pages. Regarding statements in the previous newsletter about property disputes, some details may have been oversimplified. The board is committed to resolving all community issues in a professional manner. It did not mention me, did not acknowledge the lies, and did not correct the false narrative she had created. Marcus wanted to sue immediately, but I hesitated. Suing would keep me locked in combat with these people indefinitely. The legal battle would drag on for years. I would become even more of a pariah in the community. Every trip to the grocery store or the Marina restaurant would be awkward at best, hostile at worst. Then the situation escalated in a way I never anticipated. It was a Friday evening in mid-December. I was working in my garage when I heard shouting from the direction of the lake. I walked down the path and saw flames. My dock was on fire. I ran back to the house, grabbed a fire extinguisher and my phone and called 911 while sprinting back toward the lake. The fire was concentrated on the far end of the dock, the beautiful old cypress wood going up like kindling. I emptied the fire extinguisher on it, but barely made a dent. The Lake Geneva Fire Department arrived within 10 minutes. They had the fire out in another 15. The entire outer 20 feet of my grandfather's dock was destroyed, collapsed into the water in a smoking ruin. A fire inspector named Captain Reynolds examined the scene carefully. After about 30 minutes, he came over to where I was standing with a blanket around my shoulders, watching my family's history burn. "Mr. Thompson, this was definitely arson. We found evidence of an accelerant, looks like gasoline, poured on the decking. Someone set this deliberately." Deputy Torres was there too, having responded to the fire call. He looked grim. "This is beyond harassment now. This is a serious felony. I am calling in detectives." The next few hours were a blur of interviews and evidence collection. I showed them the security camera footage. The cameras caught a figure approaching the dock around 8 p.m. The person was wearing dark clothes and a mask again, carrying what looked like a gas can. They poured accelerant on the far end of the dock, lit it, and left. The angle was better this time than with the mailbox incident. The detectives studied the footage carefully. One of them, Detective Sarah Marsh, paused it at a moment when the figure turned slightly. "That looks like a woman based on the body's shape and gait, maybe 5'5", average build." Patricia was 5'5" with an average build. But so were probably 1,000 other women in Lake Geneva. Detective Marsh interviewed me extensively about my conflicts with the HOA. I told her everything, showed her all the documentation, the agreements, the harassment. She took notes carefully and said they would be interviewing HOA board members. Over the next week, detectives interviewed Patricia, Gerald, Susan, and the other board members. They also interviewed several residents who had been vocal about their dislike of me. Everyone denied involvement and provided alibis. Patricia said she was at a dinner party with friends, confirmed by multiple witnesses. Gerald was at a movie with his wife. Susan was at her sister's house in Milwaukee. The investigation stalled. Without a clear suspect or additional evidence, there was not much the police could do. They assured me they would keep the case open and follow up on any new leads, but I could tell they were not optimistic. I hired a contractor to assess the damage. The verdict was heartbreaking. The fire had destroyed the outer section completely, and the heat had damaged the structural integrity of several pilings. The entire dock would need to be rebuilt. The estimate came in at $42,000. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the estimate and feeling more defeated than I had in my entire life. This was not about rules or property rights anymore. Someone had destroyed a piece of my family history, something my grandfather built with his own hands. It felt personal and cruel in a way that all the previous harassment had not. Marcus called the next day with news. Richard Voss contacted me. He said Patricia has resigned from the HOA board effective immediately. Why? He would not say, but reading between the lines, I think the rest of the board forced her out. The arson investigation made them nervous. They do not want any liability if it turns out a board member was involved. Do they think she did it? I do not know. But her resignation is suspicious timing. Patricia's resignation was announced in an emergency newsletter. The board thanked her for her years of service and said she was stepping down for personal reasons. Gerald Morrison was appointed interim president until the next election. But even with Patricia gone, the damage remained. My dock was destroyed. My relationship with the community was poisoned. The police investigation was going nowhere. I spent Christmas alone, looking out at the blackened pilings jutting from the frozen lake like tombstones. It was the lowest point of the entire ordeal. Then, in early January, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Heather Hutchins, who identified herself as a resident of Lakeshore Estates. Her voice was nervous and shaky. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about the fire. Can we meet somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop in Williams Bay, a small town about 15 minutes from Lake Geneva. Heather was in her late 30s, dressed in yoga clothes with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked exhausted and frightened. "I know who set your dock on fire," she said quietly. "I saw it happen." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Who?" "Patricia Kleinfeld. I was taking my dog for a walk that night. I always walk down by the Marina around 8 because it is quiet. I saw Patricia carrying a gas can toward your property. I thought it was weird, but I did not want to confront her. Then maybe 10 minutes later I saw flames. I put it together, but I was too scared to come forward." "Why are you telling me now?" Heather's eyes filled with tears. "Because she came to my house yesterday. She knows I saw her. She threatened me. She said if I talked to anyone, she would make sure my family was destroyed. She would spread rumors, file complaints about my house, make our lives hell. Mr. Thompson, I have 3 kids. I cannot have this hanging over me. I need to go to the police." I drove Heather directly to the Lake Geneva Police Department. Detective Marsh took her statement, recording everything. Heather described seeing Patricia with the gas can, seeing her walk toward my property, and seeing the fire start minutes later. She also described Patricia's threats, which added intimidation of a witness to the charges. Detective Marsh contacted the prosecutor's office immediately. They assigned an assistant district attorney named James Keller to the case. With Heather's testimony, they had enough for an arrest warrant. Patricia Kleinfeld was arrested at her home the next morning and charged with arson and witness intimidation. Her mugshot made the local news. The Lake Geneva Regional News ran a story with the headline, "Former HOA President Arrested for Arson." The fallout was immediate and dramatic. The Lakeshore Estates HOA board held an emergency meeting and released a statement condemning Patricia's actions and expressing support for me. Richard Voss, who also represented Patricia personally in other matters, dropped her as a client to avoid any conflict of interest. Homeowners who had believed Patricia's narrative about me being the villain started approaching me to apologize. Gerald Morrison came to my house personally, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Oliver, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for everything. We should have reined Patricia in years ago. The way you have been treated is inexcusable." "I appreciate that, Gerald." The board voted unanimously to pay for the dock repairs. "It is the least we can do. We will also cover your legal fees from all of this. We know it does not fix everything, but we want to make it right." I was honestly surprised. "Thank you. That means a lot." The criminal case moved forward quickly. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor's office was not interested in going easy. Arson is a serious felony, and the witness intimidation made it worse. The evidence was strong. They had an eyewitness, and Patricia's documented history of harassing me established motive. In March, Patricia pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree arson and 1 count of intimidating a witness. At her sentencing hearing in April, I gave a victim impact statement. Patricia Kleinfeld destroyed something that cannot be replaced, I said, standing at the podium in the courtroom. That dock was built by my grandfather 78 years ago. It was a connection to my family history, to my childhood, to memories of fishing with my father. It represented generations of my family's connection to Lake Geneva. Patricia burned it down because she could not control me, because I would not bend to her will, because she valued uniformity and aesthetic compliance over people's rights and heritage. Her actions were not just criminal, they were vindictive and cruel. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Barbara Winters, sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She also ordered Patricia to pay me full restitution for the dock damages, plus an additional $50,000 in punitive damages for the witness intimidation. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked at me one final time. There was no smugness now, no superiority. Just defeat and anger. The HOA made good on their promise. They paid for a contractor to rebuild my dock using the original plans from 1947. I sourced cypress wood from the same region in Louisiana where my grandfather had gotten the original lumber. It was not the same, could never be the same, but it was as close as I could get. The new dock was finished in June, just in time for summer. I stood at the end of it on a warm evening, watching the sunset over Lake Geneva, and felt something close to peace. The structure was beautiful, the wood fresh and golden, the pilings solid and true. Heather Hutchins and her family came down to see it. She had become an unexpected friend through all of this, bonded by the shared trauma of standing up to Patricia. Her kids ran up and down the dock, laughing and playing, while Heather and I sat in lawn chairs with cold beers. "You did a good thing," I told her. "Coming forward took real courage." "I could not let her get away with it," Heather said. "She terrorized this neighborhood for years." Someone had to stop her. Life in Lakeshore Estates changed after Patricia's arrest. The new HOA board, led by Gerald and several newly elected members who campaigned on reform, implemented significant changes. They reduced the number of aesthetic restrictions, created a formal appeals process for violations, and established clearer boundaries on the board's authority. Several other homeowners came forward with stories of Patricia's harassment over the years, and the board issued formal apologies. I even started attending occasional community events, something I had avoided for years. The hostility was gone. People who had believed Patricia's lies about me now knew the truth. I was no longer the villain of the neighborhood. I was the guy who stood up to a tyrant and won. The property dispute that started everything became something of a local legend. Other homeowners in HOA communities around Wisconsin started requesting surveys of their properties, curious about whether they might have similar grandfathered rights. I heard through Marcus that several HOA attorneys in the state had started being much more careful about enforcing rules on properties that predated the association. In August, I took my boat out for an evening cruise and anchored near the Marina. I sat there watching people come and go from the docks, families loading up boats, kids jumping off the floating platforms. The Marina was thriving, built partially on my land but causing no harm. I was content to let them use it as long as they left me alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the news about Patricia. She was denied early parole, will serve the full 3 years." I typed back, "Good. Some people might say I should have felt sympathy for her, locked away in prison." But I thought about my grandfather's dock burning, the months of harassment, the lies she spread, the witness she intimidated. Patricia had made her choices. She had to live with the consequences. I started the boat engine and headed back toward my property. The new dock gleamed in the evening light, a testament to resilience and family history. As I approached, I could see the video cameras mounted discreetly on the posts, a reminder of lessons learned. The private property sign I had installed was weathering nicely, the letters still clear and unambiguous. I tied up the boat and walked up the dock toward my house. The wood felt solid under my feet, properly maintained and built to last another 78 years if I took care of it. My grandfather would have approved. Inside, I poured myself a whiskey and stood at the window looking out at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the deepening twilight. Lakeshore estates spread out to my left, their identical beige houses with their perfect lawns and their floating docks. My house stood apart, painted forest green, with my vegetable garden in front and my weathered cypress dock extending into the water. Different, unique, free. The legal bills had been substantial even with the HOA covering most of them. The emotional toll had been real. But I had protected something important, not just the physical property but the principle behind it. No one had the right to come onto land my family owned for generations and dictate how I used it. No one had the right to destroy something precious because it did not fit their aesthetic vision. I thought about all the people living in HOA communities across America, dealing with overzealous boards and petty restrictions. How many of them had rights they did not even know about? How many had grandfathered protections or property boundaries that could give them leverage? How many were suffering under Patricias of their own, too intimidated to fight back? The story made it into several property rights blogs and local newspapers. I did one interview with a Lake Geneva reporter explaining the basics of the case. The story went somewhat viral in HOA reform communities. I started getting emails from people asking for advice about their own disputes. I could not help everyone, but I replied when I could, pointing people toward property lawyers and suggesting they pull their original deeds and surveys. If my experience could help even a few other people stand up to abusive HOA boards, it was worth sharing. In September, the Lakeshore Estates HOA held their annual meeting. For the first time in years, I attended. The meeting was held in the community center, where I had confronted Patricia and her board about the Marina. Walking back into that room felt surreal. Gerald Morrison stood at the front and gave a State of the Association address. He talked about the changes they had implemented, the improved financial transparency, the reduced violation enforcement. Then he did something unexpected. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge Oliver Thompson," Gerald said, gesturing toward where I sat. "Oliver, your courage in standing up to abuse of power made this community better. We lost our way for a while, but your refusal to back down reminded us what property rights and fairness really mean. On behalf of the board and this community, thank you." The room burst into applause. I felt my face flush, uncomfortable with the attention but also deeply moved. These were my neighbors, people who had shunned me and believed lies about me, now standing and clapping. It was not forgiveness exactly, it was acknowledgement. It was enough. After the meeting, several people came up to shake my hand and chat. A younger couple who had moved in recently asked about the history of my property. An older man who lived near the Marina told me his grandfather had known my grandfather back in the 50s. Slowly, connections were forming. I drove home that night feeling something I had not felt in years, like I actually belonged in this neighborhood. Not as a problem or an outsider, but as a legitimate member of the community who happened to have different property rights. It was a strange feeling after so much conflict. The seasons turned. Winter came again, and I winterized the new dock carefully, protecting it from the ice and cold. The security cameras kept watch, but nothing concerning appeared on them. The harassment was truly over. In February, I got a letter from Richard Voss. He was writing to inform me that the HOA had formally amended their governing documents to acknowledge properties that predated the association, and to create clear exemptions for grandfathered rights. The amendments had been approved by a vote of the homeowners. My property was specifically listed as exempt, along with 2 other older properties I had not even known existed in the development. The letter included an olive branch of sorts. Mr. Thompson, on behalf of the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association, I want to express our sincere regret for the years of conflict. You were right, and we were wrong. Your property rights were always valid, and we should have acknowledged that from the beginning. I hope we can move forward with a better relationship. I appreciated the gesture. I wrote back thanking them for the formal recognition and expressing my hope that the community would continue to improve. Spring arrived, and I began preparing for another season on the water. I inspected every inch of the dock, checking for winter damage, tightening bolts, treating the wood. The cypress had weathered beautifully over the winter, developing the rich patina that made the original dock so special. On a warm April morning, I launched my boat for the first time that season. I cruised slowly past the Marina, waving to a few early-season boaters who were preparing their own vessels. No one glared or turned away. A couple of people waved back. I motored out into the main lake, opening up the throttle and feeling the wind on my face. Lake Geneva spread out before me, sparkling and beautiful, ringed by estates and marinas and state parks. My family had been part of this lake for 80 years. We had helped build its history. We belonged here. I thought about Patricia sitting in prison, her 3 years of punishment slowly ticking away. I wondered if she had learned anything, if she understood why what she did was wrong. Probably not. People like her rarely gained that kind of self-awareness. She probably still believed she was the victim, that I was the villain who destroyed her life by refusing to comply. But it did not matter what she believed. Justice had been served. My property was protected. My dock was rebuilt. My reputation was restored. The community was healing. I anchored in a quiet cove and cast a fishing line, settling in to enjoy the morning. The water lapped gently against the hull. Birds called from the shoreline. It was peaceful in a way that I had forgotten was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Remember that offer from the Wisconsin Property Rights Association to speak at their conference? Still interested? I thought about it. Sharing my story more widely, helping other people understand their rights and stand up to HOA overreach. It felt like the right next chapter. I typed back. Yes. Let's do it. The speaking engagement was scheduled for June. I prepared a presentation that walked through the entire saga, from the first condemnation notice to Patricia's conviction. I included practical advice about researching property histories, understanding deed restrictions, and knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. The conference was held in Madison, attended by property rights attorneys, HOA reform advocates, and homeowners dealing with their own disputes. My story resonated. During the Q&A session, people asked detailed questions about the legal strategies, the survey process, and how to handle HOA intimidation. One woman in her 60s stood up and said, "Thank you for fighting. My HOA has been trying to force me to remove my late husband's garden shed for 3 years. It is the last thing he built before he died. Your story gave me the courage to research my property deed. Turns out my land was also grandfathered. I sent them the documentation last week. They backed down immediately. Stories like that made everything worthwhile. The stress, the legal fees, the burned dock, the months of conflict, it all meant something if it helped other people stand up for their rights. I returned home from Madison feeling energized. The summer stretched ahead, full of possibility. I made plans to restore some of my grandfather's old fishing equipment, to document the property history more thoroughly for future generations, to simply enjoy the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. In July, I threw a dock party. I invited neighbors, friends, Marcus and Jennifer, Heather and her family, even Gerald Morrison and a few current HOA board members. We grilled burgers and drank beer and watched the sunset from the end of the dock. Kids jumped off the end into the lake, their laughter echoing across the water. Adults stood in small groups talking and laughing. The dock held steady under the weight of 30 people, as solid and reliable as the day my grandfather built the first version. Heather came up beside me as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "This is nice. You did good, Oliver." "We did good," I corrected. "You took the risk of coming forward. That made all the difference," she smiled. "I guess we both did what needed to be done." As darkness fell, people started heading home. I stood alone at the end of the dock, looking out at the water. The Marina was lit up to my left, boats gently rocking in their slips. My house was behind me, its porch light warm and welcoming. Everything was in its place. I thought about the long journey from that first condemnation notice to this moment of peace. The discovery of the lake bottom property rights had been the turning point, the leverage that shifted the balance of power. But the real victory was not legal, it was personal. I had refused to be bullied. I had stood my ground. I had protected what mattered. My phone buzzed one more time. A news alert. Patricia Kleinfeld denied transfer to minimum security facility. Will remain in medium security prison for remainder of sentence. I put the phone away without responding. Patricia was no longer my concern. She was paying her debt to society, and when she got out, she would not be my problem. The HOA had banned her from ever serving on their board again. She would just be another resident, stripped of the power she had abused. I walked slowly back up the dock toward my house, trailing my hand along the smooth cypress railing. The wood was cool under my fingers, alive with the memory of trees that grew in Louisiana swamps and were crafted into something lasting by my grandfather's skilled hands. This new version would carry that legacy forward. Inside, I poured one final whiskey and sat in my favorite chair by the window. The lake was dark now except for scattered dock lights and the running lights of a few boats heading home. The water moved in eternal rhythm, unchanged by human disputes and conflicts. It had been here before my grandfather arrived, and it would be here long after I was gone. But for now, this moment, this place was mine. Protected by law, defended through courage, preserved for the future. The dock stood as a symbol of that victory, a physical manifestation of the principle that property rights matter, that bullies can be defeated, and that sometimes the little guy really does win. I raised my glass to the lake, to my grandfather's memory, to everyone who had stood with me in the fight. The whiskey was smooth and warm. The house was quiet. The dock was safe. Everything was exactly as it should be.